Ever notice how some things in the news kind of simmer for a while and suddenly, bam, everyone's talking
Yeah,
about?
totally.
Like this whole thing with FEMA, right? It feels like that's been brewing, and now it's front and center.
For sure. It's a big deal, especially when you think about how crucial they are when disaster strikes.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, you sent over some fantastic material.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, a transcript from that Ring of Fire YouTube video.
Right, right.
They really get into the nitty-gritty about these statements regarding FEMA and whether it might actually get dismantled. So we're going to break it all down for you today, understand the main points, see what the potential consequences could be, and just get a better grasp on the bigger picture surrounding this whole debate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to look past the headlines and understand what's really going on.
Okay, so let's jump right in. What was the catalyst for all this talk about potentially dismantling FEMA?
Well, it seems like it all started with some, shall we say, unhappiness with the agency.
Right. Dissatisfaction. The transcript doesn't really say exactly why, but it mentions Trump bringing up the idea of completely abolishing FEMA.
Uh-huh. And that's something he suggested before, too.
Right, not a new concept from him, but what they're proposing instead of FEMA is really interesting.
And definitely giving the money for disaster relief straight to the states.
Like completely bypassing FEMA. So that begs the question, would that even work?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Huge question mark. And the transcript highlights something pretty eyebrow-raising.
Oh, what's that?
It points out that the top 3 states getting FEMA funds are Florida, Texas, and Louisiana.
Interesting.
And get this, those all lean Republican. So the states currently benefiting most from FEMA could be the most impacted if it goes away.
It's kind of a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have a political base often pushing for less federal involvement, but they could be the most vulnerable without that federal support in a crisis.
Exactly. And then there's the whole question of oversight, right?
Absolutely. If the money goes straight to the states, who's making sure it actually gets used for disaster recovery and goes where it's needed most?
Exactly. Without that federal oversight FEMA provides, how can we be sure it's being used properly, transparently, and actually reaching the people who need it?
It's a valid concern.
Yeah. The transcript hints that funds could be diverted or misused. It doesn't say it definitely would happen, but it's a risk we have to consider.
It makes you wonder, is this just a one-off idea, or is it part of a bigger strategy?
Right, and the transcript uses this phrase that really stood out to me, deconstruction by little paper cuts.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Powerful imagery.
Instead of a complete overhaul all at once, the idea is to kind of chip away at the agency bit by bit with smaller actions.
Death by 1,000 cuts, as they say.
And they give a specific example that seems to be fueling some of this anti-FEMA sentiment.
What was it again?
The $59 million spent on hotel rooms for migrants in New York.
Ah, right. I see how that could be used to paint a negative picture.
Exactly. And they compare it to negotiating tactics you might see with big corporations.
Interesting analogy.
Like deliberately causing disruptions, pointing out every little inefficiency to justify bigger changes down the line.
It almost feels like a calculated strategy.
Right, weakening your opponent, so to speak, before going in for the kill.
It definitely raises questions about FEMA's effectiveness as it is now.
Yeah. To be fair, the transcript acknowledges there have been criticisms of FEMA in the past. They even reference discussions going back to Hurricane Ivan in 2004 about the agency's shortcomings.
Right. So this isn't a brand new critique.
Not at all. But it's crucial to keep things in perspective, right?
Wellies.
The transcript makes it clear that FEMA isn't perfect. They've had issues. They've been called dysfunctional. But it also offers a possible explanation for those issues.
What's that?
That FEMA's problems might stem from its structure and the fact that it's consistently been underfunded across different administrations.
That makes sense. If you're constantly being starved of resources, it's hard to function at your best.
Exactly. It would be like trying to run a marathon on an empty stomach.
You might finish, but it wouldn't be pretty.
And this lack of resources might explain why so many people have negative experiences with FEMA after disasters.
Right. The transcript mentions the delays people face getting approvals for roof repairs or waiting for essential supplies to arrive.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's dealt with FEMA personally probably has a story, and it often involves red tape and frustrating delays.
It definitely shapes public perception.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the conversation then zooms out to a much broader issue, how the public views bureaucracy as a whole.
Ah, the dreaded bureaucracy.
The transcript really emphasizes that people generally see it as inefficient and problematic, like the DMV.
Oh, the DMV. the classic example.
Long lines, tons of paperwork, just a general feeling of inefficiency.
Well, been there.
It's a shared frustration. And it seems like this whole FEMA debate is tapping into that widespread disillusionment.
Interesting. So it's not just about FEMA. It's about a bigger feeling of frustration with government bureaucracy in general.
Right. And they even mention the large number of government employees taking early retirement. Almost like they're fed up with the system, too.
That's telling.
And when you look at it through the lens of political ideologies, it makes even more sense.
How so?
The transcript brings up Reagan's famous line, "I'm from the government, and I'm here to help."
Ah, yes. A line dripping with sarcasm.
Which highlights a long-standing skepticism, particularly on the right, about government intervention.
Right. The less government, the better sort of thinking.
Exactly. And they even quote Grover Norquist, who famously said he wanted to shrink government down to the size where it could be drowned in a bathtub.
Wow, that's pretty extreme.
It really shows you the core philosophy at play here.
So it's not just about FEMA. It's about a larger goal to reduce the federal government's power and shift more responsibility to the states.
Which brings up the question, are states actually equipped to handle something as massive as disaster relief on their own?
Right. It sounds good in theory, local control and all, but the reality is large-scale disasters are incredibly complex.
You need immense resources and coordination. And the transcript argues that, despite its flaws, FEMA offers that, in a way, individual states might struggle to replicate.
Especially when you have disasters that affect multiple states at once.
Exactly. It becomes a logistical nightmare.
And then you have the issue of potential misuse of funds at the state level.
Even with governors who are generally popular, there are concerns about accountability and whether the money would be used wisely.
It's a valid point. There are definitely some governors I wouldn't trust with my wallet, let alone billions of dollars in disaster relief funds.
That's a great way to put it. It really highlights the risks involved in reducing federal oversight.
That's a tough balance, isn't it? The desire for local control versus the need for a strong, coordinated federal response in a crisis.
It makes you wonder, could this whole FEMA debate be a sign of things to come for other government agencies?
I see where you're going with that.
The transcript mentions the dismantling of USA and the challenges faced by the CFPB as potential indicators of a wider trend.
It's not a huge leap to think other agencies might be next.
Right. They even bring up the Department of Education as a possible target. And get this, they suggest relocating it could be a tactic to undermine its effectiveness.
Relocation. Interesting.
Like not necessarily getting rid of it entirely, but making it so difficult to operate that it loses its impact.
I've never thought of it that way, but it makes sense.
And it all comes back to this idea of a calculated strategy.
Right, using unconventional tactics to weaken or even dismantle institutions.
So, to sum it all up, this deep dive into the FEMA discussion has revealed a whole bunch of interconnected factors.
Yeah, it's definitely more complex than it appears at first glance.
We have frustration with bureaucracy, ideological goals to shrink the government, valid criticisms of FEMA's performance, and concerns about states handling things on their own. It's a lot to unpack.
It really is.
And it brings us to a final thought for you to chew on. Given the massive challenges of responding to large-scale disasters and the often frustrating realities of bureaucracy, what do you think the ideal balance is between federal and state responsibility?
And what might the long-term consequences be if we completely change how we respond to disasters? These are tough questions, but they're crucial to think about as this conversation about FEMA's future continues to unfold.
Absolutely. Thanks for diving into this with me.
My pleasure. It's always a good discussion.
Until next time.
See you then.